Chuck, we're all delighted to have you back with us. So let me ask you, as a former squadron leader in the Navy's SEAL Team 6, what do you make of the announcement last week by GUR that they carried out a successful clandestine operation within Russia against the Russian Navy?
Yeah, this was an incident that occurred on 7th April of this year in a port in the Russian exclave of Kronstadt. It was a Buyan M-class missile corvette. Her name was Surpakov. She burned at pier side. The Russians said it was an accident. Right away, there were Ukrainian sources saying this was a deliberate, overt act on behalf of the Ukrainian armed forces. I didn't really know what to make of it. But just yesterday, there was a press conference in Ukraine. The GUR admitted it was their operation, and they have the receipts. One of their assets was able to get aboard the ship, start a fire in the missile control spaces, and also in some IT automation spaces on the ship, started that fire. In the confusion, absconded with classified documents, among them literally the blueprints to the ship. And the interesting thing is, as this press conference was being held, Ukraine announced that they had actually extracted and exfiltrated that asset. So they got that person out of Kronstadt, across several borders, and back into Ukraine. Now, in my business, that's a successful operation.
So that's all good news. And I'm very curious what you think about what's going on here in the battlefield. This past summer, Russia obviously had a window of opportunity, a huge possibility to take terrain. The Ukrainians were outgunned, the Americans were holding up weapon supplies, and yet the Russians were not able to capitalize on that. Why is that? And what is the current state of play?
Yeah, that was so. What happened in the spring, I'm now calling the congressional arms embargo. Now, when the supply of ammunition and arms was held up by the United States, Ukraine was forced to draw on its strategic reserves of weapons. You never want to have to do that. You need to save these things for a rainy day. That opened a window for Russia to attack, to press hard, to use the advantage that it allegedly has in materiel supply. It didn't happen. We didn't see any change in Russia's, what I'm calling little war tactics. Very seldom do they attack with anything larger than a platoon or a company. And they continued those operations. Now, they had some success around Avdiivka, and they pushed forward into some very flat, open terrain, which is very costly to take, and it's very costly to hold every day. So Russia missed that first opportunity. Now, we're still in a time of consequence because the United States is still not providing adequate arms. That being said, what I've seen thus far this spring, what I'm seeing this summer is Russia doesn't have the tactics, it doesn't have the military capability, and it might not even have the will to take larger amounts of terrain. I've said this a million times. In my estimation, as far as Russia's incursion, we're looking at the United States in Vietnam in 1971. They haven't lost, but they're not going to win. And the writing's on the wall. They're not going to win this. Ukraine is going to win this.
So let me ask you about that. What parallels do you see between today's war and Vietnam or another war, for instance?
Well, I see a superpower allegedly entering a country with the wrong set of tactics, with the wrong strategy, and the wrong set of tactics to inflict their military will. U.S. Army in 1970, 1969, 1967, they were trained, they were equipped to fight a European war against the Soviet Union. They applied that equipment, that training, that manpower, and put it into the jungles of Vietnam, where there weren't going to be any large set-piece battles, where the Viet Cong, like the Ukrainians, brought the fight down to rifle squad on rifle squad. eradicating the maneuver warfare capability that the United States had. So we cut to 50 years later, you've got the Russian army who came in here and thought blitzkrieg 72 hours, the same plan we had for 1980s in Europe, and we're going to take Ukraine. It didn't happen. And now Russia is fighting squad, platoon size battles against an enemy where rifle squad to rifle squad, Ukrainians have the advantage. They're better trained, they're better motivated, they're better supplied. All that being said, there are some key weapon systems that Ukraine must have to continue this war on a better than even footing.
What sort of weapon systems would you suggest?
Keystone, I think, are top-end air defense systems. Despite Russian propaganda that Ukraine is attacking beachgoers in Crimea, every single day, Russia launches precision strike munitions against Ukrainian civilian high-density housing areas. That's a strategic target for Russia. The remedy to that are more and more and more Patriot missile systems, which at first are going to have to be used to defend Ukraine's cities, right? You've got to defend manpower and key infrastructure. That's so important because Putin is attacking cities so that Ukraine will have to delegate its air defense systems back away from the front line to defend cities. You supply more of them to Ukraine, they can push air defense assets forward to conduct and cover maneuver warfare against the Russians. That's going to be the key. So in the meantime, on the top of my Christmas list, Patriots, 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 NASMs, right down the line. And think of upside down wedding cakes, right? They all have different longer range capabilities. That's what Ukraine desperately needs.
So when you look at everything that's happening, do you think that the Russians understand that they're in a bad situation? Or do you think that things are going as planned? What do you think is probably in the minds of Russia's military officers that are here in Ukraine?
You know, let's instead of talking about the officers for a second who lead the enlisted men, let's talk about what the enlisted men think. Just this week, I put up a video, and it was wounded servicemen from a Russian tank division. There they were on crutches with one leg or no legs, one arm, concussions, and they had made a video saying they can't go back to the front. You're sending us back to the front. We don't have arms, we don't have legs. Okay. We see so many of those videos of disaffected Russian soldiers filming appeals on video that we lose the big picture. That is what's called a mutinous assembly. You don't get your buddies together and complain about something. You don't film 40 guys saying we're going to refuse this order. But those videos are so common in the Russian army. That bespeaks like an abysmal level of morale, which always equals an abysmal level of combat effectiveness, which is why we see these blunted, failed attacks. This is why we see 1,000 casualties a day. It just isn't going to work. So now we go to the officers. What do they think? They think their guys are unmanageable. They think they can't trust their guys with anything else except a very small, completely supervised, micromanaged little attack. And you can't win a war like that. You don't win a war at the platoon level. You win a war at the division level. And Russia has shown it cannot conduct large-scale maneuver warfare except in retreats. They retreated in Kharkiv and they retreated out of Kherson. Those are their biggest moves in this war. And I promise you, we're going to see bigger routes coming. I absolutely promise you. But there's some material requirements, and we need Washington to get on the horse and deliver.
So going forward through the rest of the summer, going into the fall, what else do you think we should be on the lookout for on the battlefield?
Until we can get Ukraine's strategic reserves of material and ammunition, until we can get them topped off, we're going to have to see Ukraine essentially on the defensive. But Before anyone draws a pejorative off the word defensive, everybody should remember this. Russia is losing 1,000 guys a day. They're above 500,000 casualties in 2 years. You keep killing 1,000 guys a day, and it's not sustainable, right? Casualties in Vietnam never approached that level, but the United States still lost the war. I think we're going to look at that as well. Unfortunately, I'm one of those guys. The war is going on, unfortunately, for a couple more years. But the trend right now, the cards are on the table. Military analysts can see it. Russia is not effective. They're not going to win this. They can't win it. There's no sea change coming in their leadership, and there is no revolution of inspiration that's going to sweep through their enlisted ranks. They're tired. Their equipment sucks. Their supplies suck, and they're in trouble.
So, Chuck, when you heard the announcement just last week that Russia was open to negotiating with Ukraine and they were trying to find a way to do that, how'd you read it? Do you think that this is just a setup to get the Ukrainians to enter negotiations so that Russia can prepare a new attack? What do you make of this whole situation?
Well, so this week, Putin allegedly floated a blue chip for him that it might be possible that Russia and Ukraine could share Crimea. Well, that's like me telling you I kicked the front door in on your living room. I've taken over that and the hall bathroom, and we can share it. But what was interesting to me, and I'm not sure I heard a lot of other people write or comment this way, I smell desperation. I smell desperation. Look, his plan was a 72-hour operation, take over Kyiv, take over the entire country, start executing the intelligentsia, the political class, liquidating them, and turning Ukraine into Belarus. Buddy, that didn't work. 500,000 Russian dead later, he is no closer to winning this war. So I see this as Putin looking for an off-ramp. He knows that you're going to share Crimea. No, you're going home. You're going home. And the price of them staying there, Jason, it's not sustainable for their economy. It's not sustainable for their military. And look at it this way. You talk about a war and the vicissitudes of war. At the beginning of the American Civil War, the Confederacy was ascendant, right? They were kicking America's ass until you had the enter General Grant. He turned the whole effort around. Look, there is no General Grant on the Russian side. There just isn't. They've got the same corrupt generals that have come up under the Putin kleptocracy. There is no military talent there at all. I'm promising you, I know how this war is going to end. And there is going to be one Russian general videoed walking, and he's going to be the last guy across the frontier, and it's going to end that way. And maybe it's going to end Putin too.
Chuck, that sounds great. And trust me, we're really looking forward to it. Thank you for your time today.
Anytime, buddy.